Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from 3.5 Archive. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different to celebrate 20 D&D 3.5 Prestige class reviews. We're going to be doing a top 10 of my personal favorite D&D 3.5 sourcebooks. Now this is pretty difficult to do because there are so many of them. I happen to own all of them, and it's really difficult to narrow it down to 10 out of nearly 100. So, to help narrow it down, I've chosen to exclude most of the 3.0 books from the running for my top 10 list. I've also chosen to exclude all of the compendiums, so that would be the Magic Item Compendium, Rules Compendium, and Spell Compendium. Those are all great books to have, and they're very important parts of my collection, but I decided not to put them anywhere on the list here. Also, I chose to exclude the Monster Manuals. If I hadn't, Monster Manual 5 would have been number 2 on my list. Monster Manual 2 would have been number 4 on my list, and Monster Manual 3 would have been number 6 on my list. And if a book is not on this list, that's not a sign that it's bad. In fact, there are many books I couldn't find any room for on the list. I perhaps could have done a very long video in which I ranked all of the 3.5 source books from worst to best, but I decided to stick to a top 10 here. And one last thing, I've excluded any setting-specific books, so anything from Eberron, Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, or even Dragonlance is not going to show up here. Again, that's not a sign I dislike these books, it's simply a way to thin the herd a little bit and really focus this list on core, so to speak, 3.5 supplements. So without further ado, let's get to the list. At number 10, I've chosen Heroes of Battle. This was one of the first 3.5 books I purchased for myself, and I bought it simply because I wanted mass battle rules. And as a teenager DMing, I often, of course, wanted the campaign to involve armies clashing on the battlefield quite often, probably because of Lord of the Rings related inspiration. Unfortunately, Heroes of Battle does not include any sort of real mass battle system. At best, you get something akin to what's included in the Warfare section of Complete Warrior, which is essentially gaining or losing victory points based on the player character's actions throughout a battle. It also introduces the concept of a battle scale map where each square on your graph paper is 200 feet, and it shows how you can draw the battle evolving throughout time, showing the various armies as sort of blobs on the map that move about. This is an interesting concept, and Heroes of Battle was full of many great magic items, prestige classes, and NPC stat blocks, as well as some interesting monsters, including a sort of substitute Oliphant, and a couple of interesting flying mounts for elven armies. There were also a series of order of battle charts for various armies showing their organizational breakdown. While it is a little bit more modern than one would expect, it does make the strong case, as does the Fantasy Warfare section of Complete Warrior, that Fantasy Warfare, especially in D&D 3.5, would be much more akin to modern warfare than the standard medieval warfare as we typically think of it. While much of the book is relatively fluffy Game Master advice, there are a variety of scenarios presented, NPC stat blocks, and all sorts of helpful tools to help you run a war campaign. At number 9, we have the Complete Warrior. While I was at first a little bit repulsed by the rather grim, dour, macabre warrior pictured on the front cover, quickly found this book to be one of my favorites, both for the feats it contains and for containing one of my all-time favorite prestige classes, the Dervish. It contains some interesting exotic weapons, some neat familiars that you can have, and companions that you can have for your character, and a variety of other prestige classes and feats that really help you buff up your fighter character. It included quite a few tactical feats as well, and as far as I know, this is the book where tactical feats were introduced. While most of them aren't very strong, save for ones like Shock Trooper, they are still perhaps my favorite type of feat conceptually, and really something that I wish had been better able to function inside the 3.5 rule set. There are also weapon-style feats, which require to use a particular combination of weapons. These seem a little bit restrictive, and the feat requirements certainly are, and unfortunately for the most part, the payoff is really not worth what you put in. However, the idea of them is another excellent one, and it's one that I wish had been expanded on more throughout the rest of the 3.5 sourcebook releases. At number 8, we have the Complete Arcane sourcebook. This one is full of cool ideas, from tattooing spellbooks onto your body, to the Alienist prestige class, to the strange types of elementals that it introduces, as well as a variety of magic items, powerful spellcasting related feats, and of course the Warlock and Warmage base classes, which are among my favorites of all time. And also the Wu Gen, which is a very flavorful Eastern-themed spellcaster. What really makes this one stick out for me is the grotesque and exotic art. Between the Alienist prestige class, the Wayfarer Guide prestige class, some of the other art for the various spells, and even just the cover art, there's a particular theme to it in this book that really makes it memorable, much more so than the Complete Mage, which was sort of its sequel or counterpart later on. At number 7, I have the Arms and Equipment Guide. While the Player's Handbook provides a pretty sufficient list of weapons, armor, and mundane adventuring equipment, alongside alchemical items and various other things, the Arms and Equipment Guide vastly supplements that with such exotic weapons as the Mercurial Greatsword or the Elven Double Bow. It also provides a lot of new exotic materials for armor, and prices for various commodities, however inaccurate they may be. There are also a lot of interesting tools and special adventuring gear that, while they may exceed the bounds of believability for medieval-era manufacturing even with magic involved, they are still quite interesting and handy little gadgets to have from time to time. There are also rules for using a variety of exotic mounts, including a giant sea-bound turtle that you can use as a ship or small island. You also get some vehicle rules for strange stuff like the Gnome Submersible or Ornithopter. And in the back, like any good 3.5 sourcebook, there's a healthy plethora of magic items. All in all, this is just a nice book to have for the DM to reach for when somebody wants to know how much some particular mundane item costs, and rather than just making up a number, the DM can give some sort of more consistent answer. It's also just really fun to peruse. At number 6, we have Lords of Madness. Strangely, it was a very difficult choice for this slot between Lords of Madness and Savage Species, but in the end, Lords of Madness won out. That said, Savage Species should be considered an honorable mention, at the very least. Lords of Madness is all about aberrations. It's got chapters about Beholders, Aboleths, Mind Flayers, Neogi, and a new type of aberration called the Sokar, which are skin wearers. They slither inside of their victims' bodies and essentially puppet them from within. The Neogi have always been one of my favorite groups of monsters, as there are a few different types that you can fight, and it's interesting to design encounters with them, and they're very flexible as to where you can put them. There's also a chapter on the Grell, which are another favorite monster type of mine. And of course, Mind Flayers are excellent as well, despite the fact that I shied away from using them for many years due to my aversion for the IP-protected monsters. If you like aberrations, and a disproportionate number of the most iconic D&D monsters are of the aberration type, then you're really going to love this book. It really goes in depth on the lore and background of Mind Flayers, including a history that involves them time-traveling far in the future, back to the very distant past, and thus they have a particularly fatalistic viewpoint on life, since they know how their species and most of the world is going to end. The back of the book contains stat blocks for a variety of variant Beholders and Mind Flayers, along with lots of other monsters, including strange aberrations that Mind Flayers would keep as pets. All in all, this book packs a lot of great content into its 222 pages. At number 5, we have Frostburn. While Sandstorm is perhaps the more beloved of the two, and that's disregarding the Stormrack supplement, Frostburn has always won out simply because of the amount that I've used it. It's chock full of feats, prestige classes, monsters, and magic items that are well suited for an Arctic adventure. It also has rules for a variety of exotic Arctic terrain, and quite a few adventure sites that are well detailed for you to simply slot right into your Arctic campaign setting. At number 4, we have the Exemplars of Evil sourcebook. This one provides 8 different villains with a chapter devoted to each, ranging from roughly 5th level to over 20th level. There's also an introductory chapter with feats and alternate class features geared specifically toward villains, as well as discussion of some various motivations for different villains, with a short little prompt and example villain for each type. Exemplars of Evil contains not one, but several adventures within it, each of a manageable length. It really brings together a wide variety of content from the 3.5 catalog and synthesizes it into something greater. For villains, the book contains a mistreated orc warlord, a bugbear pirate captain touched by the forces from beyond, a brother-sister villain duo that fits into the larger lore arc of the Worm That Walks, a drow priestess who was not always a drow priestess, a fire giant queen who took over from her ineffectual husband, a lich queen living on the negative energy plane, and an evil blue dragon whose empire is spreading across the desert. And my personal favorite, Amara Ashandran, a human blackguard who rules over a seaside citadel. It's a simple dungeon, but it's well put together and one of my favorites, despite the fact that it's perhaps one of the least interesting and flavorful villains in the book. At number 3 we have Cityscape, which is focused on running urban adventures, something that's difficult to pull off successfully. Urban adventures have always fascinated me, and this book goes in-depth on the D&D 3.5 conception of a fantasy city. It provides details for a lot of different types of districts, rules for city fortifications, and it discusses different types of cities, as well as providing an example map for each type. There are also rules for different city hazards that you can run into, such as the effects of a city whose air has been so thoroughly saturated by magic that it begins to lash out at the residents. There are plenty of feats, as well as some interesting metamagic feats that allow you to conceal where your spell is coming from. There are rules for different laws and legal proceedings within a city. There are all sorts of new spells. There are some example organizations. There are stats for a variety of city-specific monsters, as well as stats for a lot of NPCs to help you fill out the types of people that your players will encounter during an urban adventure. The book also provides you with a few different villains, which are fully statted out with extensive backstories. There is Cleric the Halt, who is a dwarven bounty hunter. There is Dukril of the Web, who is a half-orc barbarian gang leader. There is Father Darius Bethalzar, who is a corrupt human cleric, whose daughter is secretly a succubus. And there is my personal favorite, the Symbol, which is a strange necromantic aberration which plagues the city with swarms of undead creatures. While not a particularly powerful villain stat-wise, it's a very interesting, flavorful, and mysterious one that could serve as a long-term villain for a campaign. Very interesting idea. While it's possible to run a city adventure and not use anything from this book, it is simply enjoyable to read and has a lot of good content in it for running city adventures. Now for number 2, we jump up to the Epic Level Handbook. This book is one of the ones that fascinated me when I was younger, simply looking at the insane stats that the Epic Level monsters had really gave me a sense of wonder that perhaps only a child could have. Even so, while the Epic Level Handbook might be an attempt to put a band-aid, so to speak, on the flawed math of a game not really meant to go past 20th level in its initial design, the Epic Level Handbook is so full of great content that it makes it really, really tempting to keep playing past level 20. Between some truly primal and terrifying monsters, such as the 100-handed Hecatoncheires, unleashed only in instances where one wants to assassinate deities, to the Umbral Blot, a black ball, a living sphere of annihilation that will zip across the battlefield and reduce everything to the finest powder. The stats of these creatures are truly intimidating, even if many of them would in fact fall prey easily to a group of even mildly competent epic level characters. The epic spell creation rules, while they may also be similarly imbalanced, are full of some truly, epic spells, such as Memento Mori, which simply strikes a target dead with but a glance, or the Vengeful Gaze of God, which deals 305 d6 damage to a target, but 200 d6 damage to you. The effects that many of these spells have are truly epic, as are many of the traps, monsters, and feats in this book, which can allow you to give yourself damage reduction, or simply increase your stats by taking a feat. There are feats that allow you to deflect an infinite number of arrows per round, or similar projectiles. Spells that allow a monk to sever an opponent's head with their unarmed strike with the Vorpal Strike feat. Feats that allow you to cast multiple quicken spells per round. Feats that cause any weapon you wield to be a holy or unholy weapon. And all sorts of other abilities befitting epic level characters. While a lot of the prestige classes in this book are pretty underwhelming, it's hard to blame them, as it is really difficult to create a prestige class truly befitting an epic level character. It also details the City of Union, an interplanar metropolis geared toward being a haven for epic level characters, and there are a variety of NPCs statted out for use there, as well as a short example adventure taking place on the Plane of Fire. You also get stats for a lot of the epic level NPCs from Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms. While this is a 3.0 book and a lot of its content was later errated or updated, it's still got one of the highest concentrations of, well, there's no other way to put it, epic things between monsters and feats and spells. It simply is there to inspire shock and awe, and that's something that it does very successfully. And finally, at number 1, we have Elder Evils. The cover of this book captured my imagination when I saw it as a young teenager in a bookstore, and it was while looking at this cover that I really became excited to play out the kind of scenario depicted on the cover in a D&D game someday myself. While a lot of my love for this book is based on nostalgia, it is also a great compilation of campaign-ending epic-level threats, both old and new. While there are some, like Zargon from the old Lost City adventure, to new ones like Father Limerick, this book is really about apocalypses, about final, world-ending threats for your campaign. While apocalyptic threats may feel a little bit played out nowadays in D&D campaigns, the ones in Elder Evils are extremely imaginative. From a world-born dead, to a creature who oozes positive energy to the point she mutates nearby creatures, to a beast from the far realm encased in a prison of ice, to a multi-tentacled demon buried deep in a ziggurat in the desert, to a sea serpent so vast that the mountain ranges made up of the ridges of his back would cause cataclysmic destruction if he were to even stir slightly from his slumber, to a psionic superweapon designed by a group of wizards to destroy deities they had a grudge against, which is trying to be released by an inevitable who sees its imprisonment as a breach of contract and something it must rectify, to a few others that are equally impressive. This book really is, in my opinion, the apotheosis of D&D 3.5. Like Exemplars of Evil, it drags in content from so many different supplements, but manages to make it usable and create a variety of fun, but also mechanically interesting and flavorful encounters for your characters to go through. For me, this book is unequivocally the peak of D&D 3.5 sourcebooks, and that's why I'm giving it number 1 on this list. So that will be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this top 10. I plan to do more of these later on. I have several more planned already, and I will space them out among the Prestige class reviews and perhaps some other types of videos as well. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and so on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on 3.5 Archive.